You've been driving for hours, the open Texas highway stretching endlessly before you. A faint hum from the engine, the only sound breaking the silence. The sun has long since set, and the moon casts an eerie glow on the desert landscape, empty and desolate. There's no one around, no lights, no signs of civilization. It's just you, the road, and the vast, uncharted wilderness of the Texas plains. And yet, something doesn't feel quite right. It's as if the road itself is watching you, silently tracking your every move. The air grows thick, heavy with an unspoken tension. Your eyes flicker to the rearview mirror, and you swear you see something, no, someone, standing by the side of the road. But you can't be sure. Is it just your imagination playing tricks? Or is something far darker following you, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself? Tonight, we take you on a journey through the forgotten roads of Texas, where real people have encountered the unexplainable. Encounters that will make you rethink everything about road trips and the eerie stretches of highway that remain unexplored. Before we begin, here's something unsettling. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's journey into the unknown is just the start. The stories you're about to hear will only get more terrifying, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments below, because the night is only getting started, and the horror is about to unfold. As the sun sinks lower in the sky, the landscape of Texas begins to transform. The once vibrant horizon fades into a washed-out orange, casting long shadows across the deserted backroads. These roads seem to stretch on forever, disappearing into the distance where the earth and sky blur into nothingness. Here, in the heart of the desert, time seems to stand still. There are no streetlights, no bustling traffic, just the relentless stretch of the pavement winding through an unforgiving wilderness. The roads are long, endless almost. The thick, oppressive air clings to your skin, heavy with the dust of the plains. It's the kind of heat that seeps into your bones, making you feel like you're sinking into the earth itself. You can hear the faint hum of your tires against the road, but even that seems distant, drowned out by the vastness of the empty land. The silence is deafening. There's no chirping of crickets, no rustling of wind in the trees, just an overwhelming quiet that wraps around you like a suffocating blanket. The further you drive, the more desolate the landscape becomes. Abandoned towns flash by, their skeletal structures standing as silent witnesses to forgotten lives. Doors hang off their hinges, windows shattered by time and neglect, but there's something unsettling about them. They look like places that haven't seen life in years, yet something seems to linger in the stillness. The feeling is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it's there like an unseen hand brushing the back of your neck, making the hairs on your arms stand on end. You can't help but feel the weight of the land, as if the earth itself is watching you, waiting. The sun dips lower, casting a shadow across the road that grows longer and longer with each passing minute. The desert twilight creates an eerie glow that's neither light nor dark, an in-between that feels wrong, as though the world is trapped in a moment between the waking and the dreaming. The sky overhead turns a bruised purple, the first stars barely visible against the vast expanse. And as night falls, the road seems to change. It stretches on in an unbroken line, leading you deeper into the heart of nowhere. Each curve, each bend in the road holds more mystery than the last, as if the landscape itself is conspiring to lead you somewhere you're not meant to go. It's then that you realize you're not just driving through the desert. The desert is driving you, pulling you into its quiet, watchful depths. It was a family just like any other, setting out on a long-awaited road trip to Texas Hill Country. The excitement in their voices as they left behind the busy city life was palpable. They had all planned for this, days filled with scenic drives, local eateries, and exploring the hidden corners of this vast, mysterious state. But what should have been an ordinary journey quickly spiraled into something unexplainable, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon as they left the last gas station behind, the lights of civilization quickly fading. The road was long and empty, but the family didn't mind. They were used to the isolation that came with these backroads, the serenity that only the Texas plains could offer. As the miles stretched on, the car hummed along, the gentle sound of the tires against the road offering a strange comfort in the otherwise silent surroundings. It started innocently enough. A flash of light in the rearview mirror caught their attention, nothing more than a shadow in the distance. It was a figure, standing motionless by the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light cast by the headlights. At first, they thought it was just a trick of the mind, perhaps a mirage brought on by the long hours of driving. But as they passed, they all turned to look, and what they saw sent a chill down their spines. There was something unnerving about it. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch as the car sped by. It was as if it was waiting, just standing there in complete silence. And there, in that fleeting moment, something in the air shifted. The tension grew, and the unease settled in, like a thick fog that clung to their skin. No one said a word, but each of them could feel it. This was no ordinary person standing by the side of the road. The father, a man used to driving these back roads, tried to shake off the strange feeling. Probably just someone stranded, he muttered to himself. But even as he spoke, his hand gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror more often than before. And that's when it happened. They didn't see the figure at first, but as they rounded a bend in the road, there it was again. This time, it wasn't standing still, it was moving, but not in the way a person moves. It was more like a shadow, sliding along the roadside, as though it was gliding toward them, faster than any human could move. Panic set in, and the car seemed to pick up speed on its own, though no one had touched the accelerator. The mother's voice broke through the stillness, trembling as she whispered, "Look at the rearview mirror. It's following us." The father's heart skipped a beat, his pulse pounding in his ears as he did the only thing he could think of. He accelerated. The road stretched out before them like an endless black tunnel, the headlights now barely cutting through the dark expanse of the wilderness. But no matter how fast they went, no matter how far they tried to escape, the figure kept pace, keeping right alongside them, never once breaking its unnatural stride. As their speed increased, so did the terror. The figure began to draw closer, closer until it seemed to be right next to the car. The headlights flickered and dimmed, casting the entire road in shadows. The family could see the outline now, a tall, lanky form, unnaturally long limbs reaching for the car. And just as they thought they were out of range, the figure disappeared, vanishing into the dark nothingness. But the feeling didn't go away. The atmosphere in the car had changed, thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Something had crossed the threshold of their reality, and it wasn't done yet. They tried to convince themselves that it was nothing, that it was just a trick of the mind, the kind of thing that happens after too many hours on the road. But no matter how hard they tried, the feeling wouldn't go away. As they pressed on through the desolate expanse of Texas, the silence around them seemed to grow deeper, heavier. The road stretched endlessly ahead, an unbroken line of black asphalt surrounded by barren fields on either side. There was no sound, no birds calling in the distance, no rustling of wind through the trees. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The hum of the engine was the only noise filling the car, but even that felt distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Every now and then, the tires would kick up a cloud of dust, but it would quickly settle, leaving nothing but the crushing stillness behind. The further they drove, the more oppressive the silence became, thick and stifling, pressing down on them. The father tightened his grip on the steering wheel, trying to shake the feeling that the road itself was closing in around them, like a trap. Then the radio, once silent, began to crackle, faint whispers filling the static. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a low hum that seemed to rise from the deep reaches of the car's speakers. The mother reached out to adjust the volume, but the static only grew louder, more insistent. It drowned out their thoughts, making the air in the car feel colder. She shot a glance at her husband, but his eyes were fixed straight ahead, the unease written clearly across his face. No one spoke, but the tension was palpable. The radio crackled again, this time with a strange noise, something between a voice and a scream, distorted beyond recognition. The father immediately turned the knob to shut it off, but the sound lingered, lingering in the air like a bad memory. He glanced in the rearview mirror once more, and for a split second, he thought he saw it again, just a shadow moving on the edge of the road. His heart skipped a beat, and a cold shiver crawled up his spine. But when he looked again, the shadow was gone, leaving only the stretch of empty road behind them. Was it just the glare of the headlights playing tricks on his eyes? Or was it something else? He couldn't be sure. They continued on, but it was no longer just the strange noises that unsettled them. It was the feeling of being pursued. Each mile felt longer than the last, and as they sped along the dark highway, it seemed as though the road itself was changing. The headlights flickered once more, casting an eerie, dim glow across the deserted landscape. But it wasn't the headlights that were making the shadows stretch unnaturally, it was something else. The shadows in the distance, far off at the edge of the road, seemed to move. They couldn't explain it, but the darkness just beyond the reach of their headlights seemed to shift, to twist, as if it were alive. The further they went, the more it felt like something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for them to turn away so it could strike. The car sped down the road, the tires humming on the asphalt, but it was no longer just the sound of tires against pavement that filled the space. There was something else, something that was getting closer, something that wasn't of this world. It was as if the road itself was drawing them in, pulling them deeper into the void. There were no signs, no other cars, no lights. Just endless darkness and the oppressive weight of something unseen but always there. And then the shadow reappeared. Only this time, it wasn't just a shape. This time, it was a figure standing still at the side of the road, almost too still to be human. The father didn't want to look again. He didn't want to see what he knew was there, but when he glanced in the rearview mirror once more, there it was. Not just standing, moving slowly, purposefully, like it had been waiting for them all along. His foot slammed the gas pedal, but even as the car surged forward, the figure kept pace with them. No matter how fast they went, no matter how far they tried to outrun it, it was there, always at the edge of their vision, just out of reach. The radio crackled again, louder now, the distorted voice growing more frantic, like it was trying to warn them of something terrible. And that's when it hit him. They weren't just driving through a dark stretch of road. They were driving through a place that had been forgotten. A place that no one should ever find. The strange figure, the shadows in the distance, the chilling crackle of the radio. None of it was random. It was all leading them somewhere. Somewhere they didn't want to go. It started slowly, just a creeping sensation that clawed at the edges of their awareness. At first, they thought they were imagining it, just the exhaustion of the long drive, the isolation of the road getting to them. But then it happened. The father glanced once more at the rearview mirror, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The figure, the same shadowy figure, was no longer standing still. It was moving, but it wasn't just walking. It was running, and it was gaining on them. The family fell silent, their collective breath held as they watched in disbelief. The figure, tall and gaunt, moved with an unnatural speed, its limbs too long and too fast, its shape now more defined against the backdrop of the night. It wasn't human, it couldn't be. The father's grip tightened on the wheel, and the car surged forward, the tires screaming as they spun faster and faster down the endless stretch of road. But no matter how fast they drove, the figure kept pace with them. It was as though the darkness itself had come alive, feeding on their fear, running alongside them like something out of a nightmare. Panicked, the mother gasped, her eyes wide with terror. It's chasing us," she cried, her voice cracking as she clutched her seat. The father didn't answer, he couldn't. The only thing he could focus on was the road, the figure moving relentlessly alongside them, closing the gap with every passing second. The car's headlights flickered again, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch across the empty landscape. The air inside the car grew cold, an icy chill that cut through their skin as the figure drew nearer. The father slammed the pedal to the metal, the engine roaring in protest as the car shot forward, but the figure was undeterred. It didn't break its stride. It didn't even flinch. It just kept running alongside them, its head tilted slightly to the side as if it were studying them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Then, just as the family thought they might lose control, just as they thought the figure would overtake them, it did something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The figure stopped. It didn't disappear, nor did it vanish into the shadows. It just stopped dead in its tracks, standing motionless in the middle of the road, its eyes glowing eerily in the headlights. For one brief moment, the family thought they were free. They thought the nightmare was over. But as the car sped past, the figure's head snapped toward them, its expression twisted with an impossible grin, its lips barely moving as it whispered something that none of them would ever forget. "I'll be waiting for you." They thought it was over. They thought they had escaped. But the strange events didn't stop there. Years later, the family had moved on, trying to forget the terror they'd experienced that night. Life went on, as life often does, until one day they received a letter. An envelope, yellowed and worn with age, bearing no return address. The family hesitated as they opened it, the dread from that night creeping back into their minds. Inside the envelope was a single photograph, faded and frayed at the edges. The image showed the exact spot where they had seen the figure standing by the road. But the road was empty now, just a stretch of cracked pavement under a clouded sky. There was no note, no explanation, just the photograph. But at the bottom, scrawled in uneven handwriting, was a message that chilled them to their core. I was waiting for you. No name. No signature. No other words. The family tried to dismiss it. Another prank, a cruel joke from someone who knew about their experience. But deep down, they all knew the truth. The figure, the shadow, wasn't just a figment of their imagination. It was real, and it was still out there waiting somewhere in the darkness. John had been driving for hours. It was the kind of late-night drive where the world outside the car seemed to blur into an endless sea of dark, silent highway. He was nearing a small town in West Texas, a place he'd never been before, but it seemed like the perfect stop for a quick break. The diner looked welcoming from the outside, old, but with a warm light spilling through its windows. A small, rural place that didn't seem like it belonged on a road so empty. But when John stepped out of his car, something was immediately different. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if it didn't want him to breathe. The silence was heavier than he expected, and the diner, so full of promise, seemed off. Too quiet. No chatter, no clinking of silverware. It felt like no one had been there for hours, yet the lights were still on. Everything should have felt ordinary, but something about this place felt wrong. Very wrong. John walked inside, hoping that the odd feeling would fade once he was inside, away from the strange atmosphere outside. The bell above the door rang softly as he entered, but there was no greeting, no friendly face behind the counter. The only person he saw was the waitress, a woman who looked like she'd been waiting for him. Her eyes were wide, almost unnaturally so. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. She just stared at him, her gaze lingering longer than necessary. It was unsettling, but John didn't think too much of it. He ordered his meal, sat by the window, and tried to shake off the unease gnawing at him. But as he glanced outside, his heart skipped a beat. In the distance, across the field, there was something standing motionless. A figure, still as a statue, staring at him. It didn't move, just stood there in the dark, eyes fixed on him like it had been there for hours. John blinked and looked away, telling himself it was just the darkness playing tricks. But when he looked back, the figure was still there. John tried to ignore the figure, but the discomfort inside him continued to grow. The air in the diner felt heavier, colder somehow, and as he sipped his water, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He looked up, and there she was again, the waitress. She stood at the counter, staring at him. Her eyes were wide, her expression locked in something like an anxious trance. John tried to shrug it off, but the stillness in the room was suffocating. When he stood to leave, the lights flickered. Once, twice. The hum of the overheads grew faint, and for a split second, the whole diner seemed to hold its breath. The moment passed, but the unease remained. And then, as he turned to head toward the door, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, light but deliberate. Soft but constant, like someone was following him. He spun around, but there was no one there. The waitress had moved, standing at the edge of the counter, her gaze fixed on him even more intently. But no one else was in sight. John's heart pounded in his chest. Something was wrong. John couldn't take it anymore. He quickly paid and rushed to the door, hoping to escape whatever strange force had gripped the diner. As he stepped outside, his hand trembling, he locked the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking echoed in the dead silence. But just as he slid into the car and slammed the door shut, he heard it. A knock. Not from the window. No, this was different. It came from the roof. A sharp, hollow tap, like something or someone was on top of his car. John's heart dropped. He froze, too terrified to move. He slowly, cautiously, turned his head and looked up. And what he saw, it shouldn't have been there. Something was there. A shape. Dark. Too tall to be a person, too unnatural. It loomed just above the windshield, and for a split second, it seemed to shift, bending toward him as though it had come out of the shadows itself. John's breath hitched, and his hands went numb. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The tapping continued, each sound sharper than the last. Without thinking, John threw the car into gear and sped off, the wheels screeching as he tore down the road. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The images from that night, the knock on the roof, the figure standing motionless, those things stayed with him. He never spoke of them again, not even to his closest friends. But every time he drives through West Texas, that same heavy, suffocating air returns. The same feeling that something is watching him from the dark. And every time he parks his car, no matter how quickly he needs to leave, he checks the roof, just in case. Texas, a place where the horizon stretches endlessly, as if the land itself has no beginning and no end. The sun sinks low, casting long shadows over the empty highways that carve through the heart of the state. There's something unsettling about the vastness here, a feeling that creeps up your spine the longer you drive through it. The land is so quiet, so still, that it almost feels like it's holding its breath, waiting. Waiting for what? No one really knows. But what's certain is that this is not the place for the faint-hearted. For some, the wide-open spaces of Texas are a call for adventure, a freedom unlike any other. The endless roads are the ultimate escape from the confines of city life. But for others, those same roads have become the setting for their final journey. The kind of journey that ends without a trace. They vanish. And with them, any trace of the horror they experienced before they disappeared, lost somewhere between the miles of endless asphalt and the darkening skies. There are stories told by those brave enough to keep driving, or perhaps unlucky enough to encounter something that didn't want to be seen. What happened to them, no one knows for sure. But those who dared to drive after dark along these forgotten roads, well, they know better than to go back. Because when the sun goes down in Texas, the roads belong to something else entirely. It was just another late-night drive, or so they thought. The clock had already struck midnight, and the road ahead was long, empty, and the kind of desolation that invites your mind to wander. For the driver, it was supposed to be a routine trip. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the steady hum of tires on the pavement and the rhythmic flicker of the headlights. But something didn't feel right. As they passed a small, forgotten town, its name lost to time, a chill settled over them. It wasn't the cold of the night, but something deeper. A feeling of being watched, of being followed. They glanced in the rearview mirror, but the road was empty. Still, the unease gnawed at them. It wasn't the kind of feeling you could shake off easily. The faint sound of something, scraping against the car's side, like fingers running along the metal, sent a shiver through their body. They turned their head quickly, nothing there. But as the road ahead opened up again, they saw it. A figure, standing still in the middle of the road, barely visible in the fading light. The figure didn't move, just stood there, staring in their direction. No one in sight. No car, no house, no lights. Just that figure in the distance, unmoving. The driver's heart raced. They had to be imagining it, or so they told themselves. But the figure remained, unfazed by the headlights that now cut through the night with an intensity that should have made them disappear. Then things began to happen. Without warning, the car's engine sputtered. The low, rhythmic hum of the motor became erratic. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the engine died. The car jerked to a stop in the middle of the road, powerless and silent. Panic began to rise. The driver tried the ignition again. Nothing. The headlights flickered one last time before fading to darkness. The figure, still standing in the middle of the road, had somehow moved closer. Just enough to be unsettling. The air seemed to thicken, as if the road itself was conspiring against them. Every instinct screamed to drive, to get out of there, but the car wouldn't start. They pressed the gas, twisted the key, tried every option available. Nothing. No movement. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the distant sound of their own heartbeat hammering in their chest. They were stuck, alone on an abandoned stretch of road with something or someone closing in. Then, just when they thought they couldn't take it anymore, the figure reached the car. The driver froze, paralyzed by fear, staring out through the windshield as the shadow approached. The figure stood at the window for a long moment, silent, unmoving. The world felt suspended in time, like even the air itself had stopped. But then nothing. The figure was gone, vanished into the night as quickly as it had appeared. The car, now running again, sputtered to life with a harsh roar. The headlights flickered back on, bright and steady. Relief washed over the driver, but as they looked in the rearview mirror, something wasn't right. The reflection staring back at them wasn't their own. The face that looked back was pale, hollow, and unblinking. Their own eyes met them with a lifeless gaze. The driver slammed their foot on the gas, but the reflection didn't change. That same empty, ghostly face staring back from the mirror. When the driver finally reached the next town, the car seemed fine. Engine running smoothly, the headlights bright and steady once more. No sign of the strange occurrences. No sign of the figure, no sign of the chilling reflection. Just an ordinary night, if you could call it that. But as they stepped out of the car, a feeling of dread lingered. That gut-deep fear that told them they hadn't left it behind. They still couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still following them. And every time they passed that stretch of highway, they can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that hollow, empty face staring back. It started like any other night on the road. Daniel had been driving for hours through the vast emptiness of West Texas, the kind of road trip that made you feel the weight of solitude. The headlights of his car illuminated the narrow stretch of highway, the faint hum of the engine his only company. He was just looking for a place to stretch his legs, grab something to eat, and refuel for the long drive ahead. And then he saw it, just a small, unassuming diner by the side of the road. The kind you'd normally pass right by if you were in a hurry. But tonight, he was tired. He needed a break. Daniel pulled into the parking lot, the tires crunching over the gravel. The dim glow from the diner's neon sign flickered in the distance, casting an eerie light over the empty street. There was no one else around. No other cars. No sounds, except for the occasional whisper of wind. It was too quiet. As he stepped out of the car, he immediately felt it, a shift in the air. The kind of heaviness that presses down on your chest. The kind of stillness that's almost too much to bear. The diner, which from the outside seemed like a welcome stop, now appeared off in some way he couldn't quite explain. The windows, though lit inside, seemed to cast long, unnatural shadows. The door creaked when he pushed it open, and the bell above it barely made a sound as it rang. It was like stepping into another world, one that didn't quite fit with reality. He walked in, and for the first time, the thought crossed his mind, maybe he shouldn't have stopped. Daniel took a seat at the counter, trying to shake off the unease that seemed to be creeping under his skin. The waitress, a woman who looked a little too tired for this time of night, walked over. She didn't say a word, just placed the menu in front of him with a slow, deliberate motion. But then, she looked at him, a look that sent a chill straight down his spine. It wasn't a casual glance. No, it was as if she knew something he didn't. Something he wasn't supposed to know. Her eyes lingered for just a moment too long, and for the first time, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. He ordered his food, trying to act casual, but even the sound of his own voice seemed strange in the heavy silence. He sat by the window, hoping for some distraction from the uncomfortable tension building inside him. But then, just as his mind began to wander, he glanced outside. What he saw made his blood run cold. There, standing motionless in the field across the street, was a figure. A tall, dark silhouette that didn't belong there. The wind barely moved, and yet this figure stood perfectly still, unmoving, staring directly at him. No movement, no sound. It was as if it were watching him, waiting. Daniel's heart raced. He blinked, thinking he must be seeing things. But when he opened his eyes again, the figure was still there. It hadn't moved, and that's when the terror began to sink in. This wasn't just some trick of the light, or a man standing at a distance. This was something else. Something that had no business being there. Something he couldn't explain. He turned back to the counter, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched, but his mind wouldn't let it go. The figure was still there, still staring. Daniel tried to focus on his meal, forcing himself to ignore the figure outside, but the weight of the stillness in the diner was suffocating. The air seemed too thick, pressing down on him as if it were holding him in place. He could feel his heart pounding, each beat louder than the last, making it hard to concentrate. Every movement in the corner of his eye, every flicker of light felt like a warning, like the world around him was slowly unraveling. He tried to calm himself. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him after hours of driving in the dark. But just as he reached for his drink, the lights above him flickered. At first, it was subtle, a brief, barely noticeable flicker. But then they dimmed for a split second, before returning to their usual dull hum. Daniel froze, the drink still in his hand, but he didn't dare move. He looked up at the ceiling, his eyes scanning the faint shadows dancing across the diner. And that's when he saw her again, the waitress. She was standing at the far end of the counter, her gaze locked on him. Her eyes wide, far too wide, as if she were trying to look into him, through him, like she knew everything he feared, everything he was hiding. For a moment, he thought he might scream, but the quiet was too thick. He couldn't break it. Then, just as he was about to get up and leave, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They grew louder, drawing closer and closer, the floor creaking with every step. Daniel's heart leapt into his throat. He slowly turned his head, his breath caught in his chest. But there was no one there. The diner was empty, save for the waitress, still standing at the far end, her eyes fixed on him with that unnatural intensity. He looked back to the window, where the figure outside had been, and now it was gone. Not a trace. Just an empty field, as though it had never been there. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. In fact, it grew stronger, heavier, as if something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. The suffocating air, the unnerving silence, the feeling of eyes watching him from all corners of the room. It was too much. He stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he rushed for the door. He needed to leave. He had to get out of this place. His mind raced as he pushed the door open and stepped back into the cold night air, his heart pounding in his chest. The gravel crunched beneath his feet as he hurried towards his car, desperate to escape the bizarre tension of the diner behind him. The door slammed shut behind him, and he fumbled with his keys, unlocking the car with shaky hands. He jumped in quickly, locking the door and throwing it into gear. He just wanted to drive, to get as far away from this cursed place as possible. But as he started the engine, a strange noise stopped him cold, a knock. A single, sharp knock on the roof of his car. It echoed through the quiet night, piercing the silence like a scream. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a knock from the window. It wasn't a sound from the side of the car. No, this came from the roof. The blood drained from his face as he stared at the rearview mirror, his hands frozen on the steering wheel. The knock came again, louder this time, more urgent. He didn't dare look up at first, but he knew. He had to. With a trembling hand, Daniel reached for the door handle. He slowly, carefully, turned his head to look up at the roof of the car, his eyes wide in terror. And there it was. Something. Something was on top of the car. A figure, long and shadowy. Impossible to see clearly, but the shape was unmistakable. A dark, hunched form crouching on the roof, its long limbs draping over the edge like something straight out of a nightmare. It was as though it had been there the entire time, waiting for him to make his move, just to show itself when he was too vulnerable. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the figure made another sound, the unmistakable scrape of nails against metal. Without thinking, Daniel slammed his foot on the gas pedal, the car screeching as he tore down the road, the figure still there, still watching. He could see its shape in the rearview mirror, fading into the distance, but it didn't matter. Every instinct told him to drive faster, to get away from whatever it was that had followed him, that had made itself known in the most terrifying way possible. But no matter how fast he drove, he couldn't shake the image of that dark form, still clinging to the top of his car, always just out of reach, always watching. Daniel never spoke about what happened that night. How could he? What words could possibly explain the terror he had experienced? No one would believe him, not the way his hands still shook, the way his mind raced at the thought of that dark figure on the roof. He tried to forget, tried to push it out of his mind, but the images of that moment stayed with him, haunting him like an echo that wouldn't fade. He continued on his journey, but every mile, every stretch of road felt different. Every time he passed through West Texas, the weight of that suffocating air seemed to follow him. It didn't matter how far he drove, or how many times he tried to reassure himself that he had left it all behind. Something in the back of his mind kept telling him that it was still out there, waiting, watching. And now, whenever he drives through those long, desolate highways, especially late at night, there's a part of him that can't shake the feeling of being followed. The feeling that, just for a moment, if he dares to glance at the rearview mirror, he'll see that figure again, perched atop his car, its eyes locked on him. The kind of feeling that tells you that some roads, some places, are not meant to be traveled alone. Every time Daniel stops at a diner now, no matter how small, no matter how far from that night, he checks the roof of his car before he gets in. He always does, because deep down he knows, whatever was out there in West Texas didn't leave with him. It never truly left. It had started off as just another weekend getaway, a simple road trip across Texas, the kind of trip that anyone might take to escape the routine, to unwind. Mark and his friends had piled into the car, their plans as simple as they were. Head out for a few days of exploration, stop at some small towns along the way, and enjoy the open road. They had no idea that, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the road ahead would be anything but ordinary. Mark, the one behind the wheel, had always been the practical one in the group. He was the kind of guy who kept a cool head, even when things started to get rough. He'd made the drive through Texas before, but tonight, something felt different. The usual hum of the engine, the soft tunes from the radio, the occasional chatter from his friends. It all seemed so distant now, swallowed by the eerie quiet of the road. And as the miles passed, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was as if the road itself had begun to change, stretching longer and longer, the familiar landmarks fading into nothingness. His friends, Jake and Lisa, had fallen into a quiet slumber, their heads resting against the windows. It had been a long drive, and the sun had set hours ago. But Mark was wide awake, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, his eyes darting nervously from the rearview mirror to the darkened road ahead. He tried to shake off the unease that had started creeping into his mind. After all, it was just a long stretch of highway, a typical night on the road. Or so he thought. A glance at the clock on the dashboard told him it was well past midnight. The fatigue was starting to hit him too. He yawned, rubbing his eyes and telling himself to focus. Just a few more miles to go. But that was the thing. It had always been a few more miles, hadn't it? Every time he looked at the road ahead, it seemed to stretch further and further, as if the distance was never ending. And then there was the growing sensation in the pit of his stomach, like a knot tightening with each mile. The feeling that he wasn't alone out here, despite the fact that the road was as empty as the desert night. It was like something was watching them, waiting for them to make a wrong turn. Mark shook his head, trying to banish the thoughts from his mind. It's nothing, just exhaustion, he told himself. But deep down, he couldn't ignore it. The air inside the car felt thick, heavy with tension, and every few minutes, he'd glance over at Lisa and Jake to reassure himself that they were still asleep, still safe. But something about the stillness in the car, about the way the night seemed to stretch on endlessly, made him feel as though that safety was slipping away, little by little, with every passing mile. The road ahead continued to stretch on in an unbroken line, as if the night itself had swallowed all direction. Mark's eyes flicked over the dashboard, his mind growing heavy with fatigue, but he couldn't ignore the nagging sensation crawling under his skin. The silence inside the car, broken only by the hum of the tires against the asphalt, had begun to feel oppressive. It was as if the world around them had quieted entirely, leaving them alone in a bubble of eerie stillness. Mark stole a glance at his friends in the rearview mirror, seeing their peaceful, oblivious faces. But then, just as he was about to look back at the road ahead, something made him pause. He squinted at the rearview mirror again. For a split second, he thought he saw something, no, someone, moving fast in the distance. A shadow, darting along the side of the road. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light or perhaps an animal darting out of sight, but the movement was too quick, too deliberate. It was too smooth to be natural. Mark's breath caught in his throat, and he instinctively glanced to the side of the road. But there was nothing there, just the dark, empty field stretching on for miles. He shook his head, trying to clear the growing fog in his mind. It's just the exhaustion, he thought. Just the road playing tricks on me. But the feeling lingered. Something felt wrong, darker than the night. Something was out there, and Mark wasn't sure if it was watching him, or if it had always been there, lurking just beyond his perception. The quiet in the car seemed to grow deeper, heavier. The sound of the wind outside was the only thing breaking the silence, but even that seemed to whisper in ways that felt unsettling. Mark glanced at the road ahead, trying to focus, but his eyes kept drifting back to the mirror. It was as if he was waiting for something, for someone, to appear behind them. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer alone. A shiver crawled up his spine, and though the air in the car was warm, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Mark's hands tightened on the wheel as he glanced back at the empty road, trying to rationalize what he'd seen. It was nothing, just fatigue, he told himself. Nothing to worry about. But deep down, he knew. He couldn't shake the feeling that the road was aware of them. That it wasn't just a stretch of highway. It was a place of hidden things, things that moved when you weren't looking. The car had been humming along the desolate road for what felt like hours when, without warning, it sputtered. A sudden jolt ran through the vehicle, and the engine seemed to groan as if it were struggling against something unseen. Mark's heart skipped a beat as the headlights flickered once, then twice, before coming back on. The radio, which had been playing nothing but static for miles, crackled loudly before slipping into complete silence. A sharp, unnerving quiet filled the car. What the hell? Mark muttered under his breath, his hands instinctively tightening around the wheel. He pressed the gas pedal, but the car barely moved forward, as if the road itself was pushing back against them. "Mark, what's going on?" Jake asked groggily from the back seat, still half asleep. "I don't know," Mark replied, his voice tight. "I think we've got a problem." Reluctantly, he pulled the car to the side of the road, the tires skidding slightly on the loose gravel. The car came to a stop, and the silence outside was deafening. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting his skin like a shock. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but beyond that, the darkness was impenetrable. He walked around to the front of the car, scanning the engine, but everything seemed fine, nothing out of the ordinary. The engine was warm, and the hood was closed tight. Yet, something didn't feel right. His gaze shifted beyond the headlights, toward the edge of the road. There, standing motionless, was a figure, a silhouette, barely distinguishable against the dark backdrop. A tall figure, too still to be human, and yet not quite a shadow. Mark froze for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. He thought he saw it twitch, the faintest movement, as if it had noticed him. But then, just as quickly, it seemed to grow more solid in the dim light, its outline more defined. Mark's heart raced. His legs seemed to freeze, his body unwilling to move. Something deep inside told him to stay in the car, but curiosity and fear pushed him forward. He slowly took a step toward the figure, his feet dragging through the gravel. His breathing grew shallow as the figure remained unmoving, like a statue in the middle of the road. Mark called out, his voice shaking more than he intended. "Hey, are you okay?" But the figure didn't respond. It didn't even move. The air grew colder, and a chill settled over him, creeping through his bones. He took another step closer, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. His gaze never left the figure, and with each step, the world around him seemed to grow quieter, more oppressive. Then, suddenly, the figure turned, its movement sharp and jerky, as though it was forced to face him. Mark froze, his breath catching in his throat. The face, it wasn't a face at all. It was a twisted, misshapen mask of human features, the eyes too wide, the mouth hanging open as if caught in a silent scream. The skin, pale and stretched too thin, seemed to glisten with a cold sheen that made Mark's stomach lurch. Mark stumbled back in shock, his legs feeling weak, and before he could react, the figure took a step toward him. That's when it happened. The figure dissolved into the air like smoke, the edges of its form blurring and vanishing into the night, leaving only a cold, biting wind in its wake. The temperature dropped drastically, the chill seeping into Mark's skin as the wind howled around him, carrying with it a deep, unnatural feeling of dread. His heart raced, pounding so loudly in his chest that he thought it might burst. He turned quickly, running back toward the car, his hands shaking as he grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. He slammed it shut behind him, his breath ragged, eyes darting wildly. But the whispering in the wind didn't stop. It was soft at first, like the faintest murmur. Then the voice grew louder, clearer, as if it were coming from all directions. "Leave now, it's too late for you." Panic surged through Mark as he fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking violently. The engine refused to turn over. The car shook, rattling in place, as if something heavy was pressing against it. The howling winds grew louder, closer, almost like the sound of thousands of voices whispering at once. Mark's eyes darted around, but there was nothing, only the encroaching darkness and the sound of his own racing heartbeat. Then in the distance he heard it, a howl. Distant at first, but growing closer with each passing second. Mark's eyes widened in horror as the sound filled the air, reverberating through the car like it was coming from every direction. The howl stopped suddenly, replaced by a soft, eerie whisper that seemed to crawl from the shadows, curling around him. "Don't leave, not yet." The voice, soft and malevolent, was so close now that Mark could feel it on the back of his neck, sending a wave of cold fear through him. With his heart pounding, Mark slammed the door shut and locked it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispering continued, growing louder, like it was surrounding them, closing in from all sides. Mark's hands shook as he turned the key in the ignition again, this time desperately. The car sputtered, hesitated, then roared to life. The headlights flickered as the engine revved, and the car lurched forward. The howl from the distance faded into the night, but the whispering, it didn't stop. Not yet. Something was still there, still waiting. Mark drove through the night, the car speeding away from the town that never seemed to end. The road stretched on, but the sense of something following them, watching them from just beyond the headlights, never left. They made it out that night, but the terror had etched itself into Mark's memory. Every mile that took them farther away from that town, the feeling of relief was slowly replaced with something worse, a deep, unshakable dread. To this day, Mark doesn't speak about what happened that night. The road, the whispers, the figure, it all became a part of him, something he could never escape. And now, every time he drives through that stretch of Texas road, he can't shake the feeling that something is still out there, waiting for him to return. Something that always watches from the dark. Have you ever had a strange encounter on a road trip? Something that left you wondering if you were truly alone. Let me know your story in the comments below. And if you want more spine-chilling, true stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. The road ahead is full of secrets, and I'll be here to uncover them, one story at a time. Next week, we'll uncover the mystery behind the haunted stretch of Highway 67, where drivers have disappeared without a trace. It's said that no one who ventures there ever leaves the same. Some never leave at all. You won't believe what happened to the last group who dared to travel there. But be warned, once you step onto that highway, you may never be able to turn back. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button now.